Jim Collison, we're back at Heartland Developers Conference 2015, day 2. We are interviewing session keynotes and session leaders. I'm here with Trevor Sullivan. And Trevor, you actually did the Wednesday sessions as well. Those were more hands-on sessions that we did on Wednesday, and then you led one yesterday morning. You are talking about PowerShell, but before we dive into that, tell us a little bit about you. So where you're from, what you do, who you work for, how you got here. How about that?
Sure. So I'm currently working as an independent cloud and automation consultant, and I live in Fort Collins, Colorado. So I'm actually heading back this evening. And I've lived there for about 8 months now, and absolutely love the state. It's a beautiful area. If you like hiking, if you like outdoor stuff, it's the right spot
great for
to
the
be.
outdoors, for sure. Yeah.
Camping, No, it's a good way to spend a weekend, that's for sure.
Yeah, you mentioned as well, we were talking earlier, you're an MVP for Microsoft around PowerShell. What did that take? How long have you been an MVP, and what kind of things do you do with that?
So I've been a PowerShell MVP for 2 years now, and the key thing with being an MVP is really to have a deep level of technical knowledge, and also to be able to articulate that in a fashion that other people can understand. So what really helped me to kind of achieve that status is to continually blog, and you got to allow yourself to fail too. Like you can't go into blogging and expect to instantaneously be a world-class blogger, right? You got to work your way up to that status. You got to learn what works, what doesn't work. You got to learn what your audience is interested in. And it takes a lot of time. And so I started blogging back in 2006. And if I look at some of my early work, it's a little embarrassing, to be completely honest. But you know what? That's okay. I don't reflect on that too much, and I just kind of focus on going forward and learning from those experiences.
Yeah, if it makes you feel any better, podcasting is the same way. And so we always say create 10 and then throw them away. Because you'll go back. Blogging is very similar. I started back in 2007 blogging. And so if folks wanted to find your blog, where would they find that at? How would they find you?
So I'm in a lot of different social media channels. You can find my blog at trevorsullivan.net. I'm also on Twitter. Way too much. I think I'm up to like 30,000 tweets almost in the near future. I'll be hitting 30,000, and so I've been tweeting since 2008. I'm at PC Geek 86. TrevorSullivan.net's my website, and you can find me on other channels like Stack Overflow and GitHub and things like that. Yeah,
let's talk about PowerShell a little bit. We're going to do PowerShell, and then we'll talk a bit about Azure, because I want to get your take on Azure. But if as a Windows experience guy on the MVP side, we always hear when it gets difficult, you use PowerShell, right? Oh no, you can do that through PowerShell. Oh no, that can be done in PowerShell, right? And I always look at those, and they seem to me to be very complicated scripts to put out. But talk a little bit about, so if you were coming with somebody who knew very little about PowerShell, give me kind of a basic overview, because it's changed and it's gotten better in the last 4 or 5 years. What would you tell them?
Well, the thing about PowerShell is that it was designed from its inception to be a very admin-friendly language. So PowerShell was kind of designed for people who needed to automate tasks in their environment, but didn't necessarily have the programming knowledge in order to achieve that. So when you look at other scripting frameworks, things like Perl, Python, even the VB script back in the day, some of these frameworks are very hard to understand for non-developers. You actually have to study development, and the big benefit to PowerShell for brand new users is that all of the commands are very easy to understand. They follow a standardized syntax of verb-noun. So I'm going to get an object, I'm going to change an object, I'm going to create a new object. And once you kind of have that core understanding, everything else just kind of balloons up from there.
So what kind of, give me an example of some of the, if I were getting into PowerShell for the first time, or I wanted to begin to use it, what are some of the simple things you start with to kind of get yourself into it?
Sure. Some of the common tasks that people find themselves using PowerShell for are things like file system automation, copying files around, creating text files, manipulating text files, maybe just simple logging, just to log the progress or status of an application that's running on a server. Manipulating the registry is another common task. You can stop and start processes. So a lot of just kind of common Windows core tasks. And then once you get familiar with those things, you can kind of apply those concepts to other technologies like SQL Server, SharePoint, Exchange, Microsoft Azure, and others.
Yeah. So, and then for you, like today, what's the best of PowerShell? What are you guys doing with it today that's, the best of it?
So I've been working a lot lately with the Microsoft Azure Cloud Platform and automating the cloud platform using PowerShell. And when you really start to kind of get over that hump of kind of babying your servers and babying that hardware that you've got on-prem, and you're like, you know what, I really want to move to the cloud, you start realizing the power of being able to instantiate resources. Like, you want a SQL database, you don't have to worry about installing SQL Server, you don't have to install Windows Server, you don't have to create a VM and then install server and install SQL Server. It's a very painful process for admins to have to go through all this provisioning. And if I could simply call a single PowerShell command to instantiate a SQL database up in Azure, and I can connect to it from any application, that's a very powerful concept. If I want to spin up a VM in Azure, a couple commands, boom, I'm done.
Yeah.
So the speed and flexibility of provisioning resources in Azure is a huge use case.
And was that your Wednesday class here, the Azure piece? And
Yeah.
so talk a little bit about, so what did you walk through, just kind of the high points of that, and what kind of questions did you get from that group?
Sure. So the Wednesday half-day workshop was in the morning from 8:30 to 12. And the attendees of that class essentially learned how to use the Azure PowerShell module, which is available from Microsoft. It's actually being developed on GitHub as an open source project, which is kind of a paradigm shift for Microsoft.
Very much.
Just a little.
Yeah.
But it's a massive PowerShell module with hundreds of commands that allow you to provision and deprovision and configure Azure cloud resources. So what they kind of did was went through the process of understanding, well, how do I, from PowerShell, how do I access my Azure subscription? And then how do I start actually creating different types of resources, whether it's a virtual machine or a SQL database or a web app or a cache account or what have you.
And this would be opposed to just going through the admin console. And you still could continue to go through the admin console in Azure, set all these things up. But if you're doing a lot of them, right, the power of this is it's less clicks to have to go through, and you can completely script and automate it if you're setting up 1 or 10 or 15 of them, right? From that standpoint, am I getting that right?
Absolutely.
Is that right?
I mean, you hit the nail on the head right there. Which is that, automation scales. Right. Automation removes or it limits the impact of human error on IT processes. Yeah. So I mean, automation really sells itself. I don't think you really have to talk to anybody and try to convince them to actually use automation. It's more of a, what do we want to automate, and how are we going to make that process flow from a business standpoint? So do the best PowerShell users just know it in their head and type it, or is there a lot of cut and paste going on? Can you build scripts that you just save off and then bring those in and run them? Is it as simple as that? Absolutely. A lot of copy paste pastas going on, and that's okay. When you're initially learning a new language, you're going to look at other people's code and you're going to say, how is this advanced user accomplishing this task in this language? And once you kind of understand how somebody else is accomplishing it, you can then incorporate those techniques into your scripts. Yeah. With your blog, what are the common questions you're getting today with PowerShell? I mean, what's kind of the hot topic around that? What are you talking about? Well, one of the popular topics in the PowerShell world is actually tooling lately. In the past, since Windows 7 came out in PowerShell version 2.0, there's been a tool called the PowerShell Integrated Scripting Editor, or ISE, and it provides kind of a basic debugging, syntax highlighting, IntelliSense, so some pretty basic features of a text editor or a script editor. And unfortunately, it's got a few deficiencies though. And so what's been happening lately is Adam Driscoll, who's another PowerShell MVP, has been working on this extension for Visual Studio called PowerShell Tools for Visual Studio. And it's an open source project on GitHub. He's actually collaborating with some Microsoft PowerShell core resources to develop that experience inside Visual Studio. So now inside Visual Studio, we actually have a PowerShell project file to keep track of our large PowerShell projects. We've got source control integration with Visual Studio. We've got integration with the Kanban boards and the other workflow tools, agile tools in Visual Studio Online through Visual Studio. We've also got debugging support, syntax highlighting, IntelliSense. There's a lot of rich features that are available inside Visual Studio to PowerShell users now. And that's just an extension? Is it an open extension? Can any developer get access to it and install it in Visual Studio? Yeah. If you just go out to Google and type Posh Tools, the GitHub. Spell that for me. POSH-TOOLS,
Right,
Posh
thanks.
Tools.
Yep.
Okay. So just go out and search for that, and the project's right there on GitHub. So you can download the extension, install it, and you get these new templates when you create a new Visual Studio project, and you can just create a PowerShell project. I actually demoed that in my session yesterday morning.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, no, I wasn't aware of that. That's available in there. I could see, though, as you think about the more you use this, having all that availability of versioning and being able to check it in, check it out, those kinds of things get super handy for you guys, right? That would be
well, with
helpful.
with administrators who aren't familiar with programming, they're also not generally familiar with source control and the power that it provides. So, just because you can write a script and you end up, what ends up happening is you copy that script and you call it .v2, then you call it .v3. And unfortunately, that type of source control really doesn't work well, because somebody could just go change v2 without updating v3, and boom, now you've got an inconsistency between 1, 2, 3 in your current version. So, source control is really important for administrative scripters just as much as full application developers.
No, very cool. I think that'd be handy for most people working with it. Let's shift a little bit to Azure a little bit, because this is for this year. I've done this 3 years in a row. This, to me, is the year of Azure from the way we're talking about it, right? Yeah. In the past, I would mention it, well, we're not doing much this year. Everybody's working on it, which is pretty cool. Yeah. What are you seeing, just from a general standpoint, as we think of Azure, what are you seeing that's the most interesting thing on that platform going on right now? Because they're changing it all the time, right? I get constant updates. I get constant emails. Hey, new services have been added. Yeah, type deal. But what are you using, or what are you finding to be the most interesting on Azure?
Well, there's quite a few different approaches to consuming the cloud. Probably the most simplistic method of consuming cloud is to use infrastructure as a service, where you essentially just extend your network out to the cloud using a site-to-site VPN or a high-speed connection like ExpressRoute from Azure, which provides a direct extension to your MPLS network straight up to Azure. So that's very powerful. And what you can do is simply migrate your Windows and Linux virtual machines up to Azure and host that infrastructure there. So a key use case is that if you're running very expensive data centers, you've got a production data center, you've got a DR data center, these facilities are very expensive to run, even if they're co-located. So what you can do is take that infrastructure, take that aging hardware, instead of replacing your servers, which are incredibly costly, you can shift that infrastructure up to Azure. You can achieve similar performance. You can achieve a significantly more flexibility, and your total cost of ownership just dramatically drops.
Yeah, no, and I'm finding I actually run as a Windows MVP. I actually run Windows instances up there. Yeah. Did a lot of my Windows 10 work on a VM on Azure. Spin it up, run it when I need it, turn it off. It's gone, right? Which is pretty cool. And not everybody still has access to the edge, so I have to be careful with that, because I'm running this on. Other people are like, oh, wait a minute, that's not available, to the Windows, general public. Yeah, the Windows 10 imaging. But I have been running just as a standard home user. I've been running Windows Server 2012 R2. I'd mentioned to you, we run the Essentials experience, which is kind of a really nerdy home server backup concept for a lot of people. But you can run that on Azure as well.
And the great thing is that you have the flexibility to upload user images to Azure. So you're not restricted to what's in the image gallery. The image gallery is incredibly convenient if you just want to get started very quickly. But MSDN users also have access to the client images. So you've got Windows 10, Windows 8.1 images. And so it's very easy to test out new software without destroying your laptop.
Yeah, no, and very convenient. Connect to it through remote desktop and do tons of things to it. And if you don't like it, snapshot it. But if you don't like it, blow it away and start over. Very cool.
And you also get the default PowerShell remoting endpoints. So as soon as you set up a new Windows Server VM, you don't even have to RDP into it. You can just run PowerShell automation scripts, go configure it. You can use desired state configuration to do declarative configuration. Very, very powerful stuff.
We talk about PowerShell in the enterprise. Is there any PowerShell uses for a technical end user in a Windows 10 environment? Let's say, or a Windows 8 environment. Are there any applications for that, or is this only on the server side?
PowerShell works on Windows across the board universally. And that's a really cool thing, is that anybody who's interested in automating tasks on Windows, I mean, one of the common use cases you might find for kind of more of a home user, a consumer, might be to maybe their music collection's like totally out of whack, right? And they want to fix their file naming conventions, they want to fix their ID3 tags. There's PowerShell modules and methods of scripting to where you could manipulate ID3 tags, manipulate other types of metadata on your media files, and really kind of take control of your media library.
Yeah.
So there's
Quickly, that's a good
resize images.
Yeah.
You know.
Interesting. If I were interested in doing something like that, but let's just say with my images, that's a lot of people have a lot, right?
Yeah.
A lot of pictures now.
Especially in Colorado.
Yeah, exactly. Where would be the best place to go to kind of start picking up some of those scripts to be able to do stuff like that? What would be your recommendation?
You know that space is a little bit more limited than the enterprise space, just kind of naturally. There's a lot more people that are blogging about SQL and Exchange and SharePoint and Azure automation. But the cool thing about PowerShell is that you can actually, as long as you have a fundamental understanding of the .NET framework, you can actually load in arbitrary .NET assemblies into your PowerShell session, and you can then begin consuming those .NET types. And there's C#.NET libraries out there that'll do things like image resizing, media encoding, just all sorts of stuff. You know, ID3 tags for MP3 files. And so if you understand the .NET framework and you understand the PowerShell language, you can actually create some pretty advanced scripts. I'm not aware of any modules off the top of my head that expose that through kind of a more friendly user interface, but you can create one. There's an opportunity.
Maybe there's a blog podcast opportunity for folks to help. Because it would be interesting, I think, sometimes in those, especially in that area for photographers or for podcasters who are creating a lot of this rich content around video, audio, and pictures to be able to have some scripts, some basic scripts to say, well, I'm going to run these, maybe a dedupe process, some of those kinds of things, see how many are the same and display them to me so I can make some decisions on getting that done. Well, Trevor, thanks for taking a few minutes to be with us this morning, and it's certainly interesting. Tell folks again, if they want to find your blog, where would they go to find that?
Yep. So you can find my blog at trevorsullivan.net, and you can find me on Twitter at PCGeek86.
All right. Thanks, Trevor. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you. You bet.
Cheers.